The human who feels no pain. Soraya stumbled through the thick jungle, her legs weak, her breathing heavy. Her ship had been shot down, and now she was stranded on this unknown planet. The sky above her was dark, filled with swirling red clouds. The air smelled of damp earth and distant fire. She had to find shelter. She had to find help. Then she heard it, a groan, a sound of pain. She followed the noise, pushing through thick vines and stepping over twisted roots. And then she saw him, a human. He was sitting against a broken tree trunk, his face calm. But his leg was completely broken. The bone was sticking out through the skin. Blood dripped onto the dirt. Soraya gasped, covering her mouth. She had seen injuries before. She was a medic, but she had never seen someone this calm with a wound that bad. The human, a man with short brown hair and a scar across his cheek, looked up at her. His eyes were sharp but tired. "You lost too?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. Soraya didn't know what to say. She had always been told that humans were dangerous, violent, unpredictable. But this one, he was just sitting there, bleeding, as if it was nothing. "You're injured," she finally said, taking a step closer. The human chuckled. "Yeah, not my best day." Then, before she could react, he grabbed his own broken leg and pushed the bone back into place. A sickening crack echoed through the jungle. Soraya's vision blurred, her stomach twisted. Her body couldn't handle the sight. Darkness swallowed her. She passed out. When she woke up, she was lying on a soft patch of grass. Her head was throbbing. The air around her was warm, and she could hear the sound of a fire crackling nearby. She turned her head and saw the human. He was sitting close, wrapping his leg with pieces of cloth he had torn from his own shirt. Soraya blinked in shock. He was still alive. "You okay?" he asked, his voice filled with amusement. "You kinda fell over." She sat up quickly, her heart pounding. Your leg." The human looked down at his own injury and shrugged. "Not the worst I've had." Soraya's mouth fell open. "You should be screaming in pain." "Pain's just information," he said casually. "I don't let it slow me down." Soraya couldn't believe it. Her species, the Venari, had advanced medical technology. They needed it because even the smallest wounds could cause extreme suffering. But this human acted like his broken bones were just a minor inconvenience. She stared at him, unsure whether to feel amazed or terrified. "Who are you?" "Ethan," he said, tightening the cloth around his leg. "And you?" "Soraya." "Well, Soraya, welcome to whatever hellhole this planet is." He picked up a small metal device and flipped it open. "My comms are busted. Yours working." She checked the device on her wrist. No signal. Ethan sighed. "Figures." He looked at her again, studying her features. "You're Venari, right? Never met one before." Soraya nodded slowly. "And you're human." "Last time I checked." He grinned. "So, are we supposed to fight or something?" Soraya shook her head quickly. "No. I don't want to fight." "Good." Ethan poked at the fire with a stick. "I don't feel like dying today either." For a moment, there was silence. Soraya watched him, still trying to understand how he could be so calm. "You should let me treat your leg properly," she said finally. "If it gets infected, you cold." A low growl interrupted her. Soraya froze. Ethan instantly grabbed a weapon, a small but sharp blade. His body tensed, his eyes scanning the trees. Something was out there. The growl came again, closer this time. The jungle around them went completely silent. Even the fire seemed smaller, as if afraid. Ethan's grip on the knife tightened. "We have company." Soraya's breath caught in her throat. She had no weapon, no way to fight. Then, out of the shadows, two glowing eyes appeared. They weren't alone. "The hunt begins." The air grew thick with tension. Soraya's breath hitched as she stared into the jungle, her heart hammering in her chest. The glowing eyes didn't blink. They just watched, unflinching. Whatever it was studying them, deciding its next move. Ethan shifted slightly, his hand tightening around the handle of his knife. His injured leg barely seemed to slow him down. He shouldn't have been standing, not with a wound like that. But he wasn't normal. That much was clear. Then, the growl turned into a low guttural snarl. More eyes appeared, flickering like tiny fires in the darkness. Soraya counted 3. No, 4. Maybe more. Her throat went dry. We can't fight them all. Ethan smirked. Sure, we can. Before she could argue, the creatures lunged. A blur of black fur and claws shot toward Ethan first, aiming for the weakest prey. But Ethan wasn't weak. In one smooth motion, he sidestepped, his knife flashing in the firelight. The blade sliced through the air, meeting flesh with a sickening tear. The creature yelped, stumbling to the side, its blood dripping onto the ground. Soraya flinched. She had never seen a human fight before, not like this. But there was no time to be shocked. Another beast lunged at her. She barely managed to throw herself backward, landing hard on the ground. Claws ripped through the space where she had been standing just seconds ago. Ethan moved before she could react, placing himself between her and the creature. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause, just attacked. He tackled the beast, driving his blade straight into its throat. The creature let out a horrible shriek, writhing before collapsing into the dirt. The others hesitated now. They circled, snarling but wary. Ethan spat blood onto the ground. Yeah, that's what I thought. Soraya forced herself up, her hands shaking. The creatures were still there, still waiting. But something was wrong. The jungle had gone too quiet. Even the remaining beasts seemed to notice. Their ears twitched. Their snarls faded. A cold chill ran down Soraya's spine. Something else is here. Ethan heard it too. He shifted, his expression turning serious. Yeah, the first attack had been an ambush. But this was something else. Then, without warning, the creatures bolted. They didn't just run. They fled, sprinting into the jungle with their tails tucked. Ethan frowned. That's not good. Soraya's breath caught in her throat. If they're running, what are they running from? The answer came a second later. A loud, unnatural screech ripped through the trees, so high-pitched it felt like nails scraping against her skull. The fire snapped and flickered. The ground trembled. Then, from the darkness, something huge moved. It wasn't like the beasts before. It was bigger, heavier, smarter. And it was coming straight for them. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Soraya's arm and yanked her into motion. Run. She didn't need to be told twice. They bolted through the jungle, dodging branches and leaping over roots. The sound of cracking trees and snapping wood followed close behind. Soraya risked a glance over her shoulder and instantly regretted it. The creature was massive, at least 3 times Ethan's size. Its skin was thick and armor-like, covered in deep black ridges. A row of sharp, jagged teeth gleamed under the red-tinted sky. And it was fast. Too fast. Her legs burned, but it was gaining on them. We can't outrun it. Ethan cursed. We don't have to. Before she could ask what he meant, he veered to the right, toward a steep drop where the jungle ended in a cliffside. Soraya's eyes widened. You're insane. Trust me. The ground beneath them ended, and they jumped. The world became a blur. Soraya's stomach lurched as she plummeted downward, the wind roaring in her ears. Then, impact. She hit water. Cold, rushing water swallowed her whole. For a second, everything was silent except for the pounding of her heart. Then she broke the surface, gasping for air. Ethan surfaced a second later, shaking water from his face. Still alive. Soraya coughed. Barely. Ethan grinned. Then you're doing great. She glared at him, but before she could yell, another screech rang out. She turned, dread filling her gut. The creature was still up there, pacing along the cliff's edge, its glowing eyes locked onto them. And it wasn't giving up. Soraya shuddered. "It's hunting us." Ethan's expression hardened. He flicked his knife in his hand, his blue eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "Then let's give it a fight worth remembering." The unbreakable human. The river was cold. The kind of cold that seeped through skin, through muscle, and into the bones. It dragged Soraya downward, twisting her in the currents like she was nothing more than a piece of debris. She struggled against the pull, her lungs burning. Then, a strong grip wrapped around her wrist. Ethan. Even with a broken leg, even after jumping off a cliff, he was the one saving her. He yanked her up, breaking the surface. Soraya gasped, coughing, as they were carried down the river. "Swim," Ethan shouted over the roar of the water. Her limbs were heavy, but she forced herself to move. The river was moving fast, the current dragging them toward jagged rocks ahead. Ethan spotted it first. "Hold on to me." She barely had time to react before he grabbed her and twisted his body, shielding her as they slammed into the rocks. The impact was brutal. Soraya felt Ethan jerk violently before they were pulled back underwater. No, 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 no. She grabbed for him, but his body was limp. He wasn't moving. Panic surged through her. Summoning the last of her strength, she kicked toward the riverbank, dragging Ethan with her. Finally, they washed up on the shore. Soraya collapsed onto her back, gasping for air. Her body ached. Her lungs burned. But Ethan, she scrambled to him. He was lying still, face pale, blood trailing from his side. The impact had reopened his wound. Soraya pressed her hands against his chest. "Ethan, Ethan." No response. Her fingers trembled as she checked for his pulse. It was weak, but still there. He was still alive. But for how long? She didn't think. She just moved. Her medical training kicked in as she tore off a piece of her own sleeve, pressing it against his wound. Blood seeped through. She needed to stop the bleeding. She needed to. A hand suddenly grabbed her wrist. Soraya gasped. Ethan's eyes snapped open, sharp and alert. "Relax, Doc," he muttered. "I'm not dead yet." Soraya nearly collapsed from relief. You weren't breathing." Ethan groaned, shifting slightly. "Took a hit. Knocked the wind out of me." Soraya's heart pounded. How was he still conscious? How was he even talking? No Veneri could have survived that kind of trauma. Ethan pushed himself up, wincing. His shirt was soaked with blood, but he was moving. Soraya grabbed his shoulders. "Lie down. You're injured." He gave her a lopsided grin. "No kidding." She wasn't amused. "You need rest." Ethan exhaled, looking around. The jungle surrounded them on all sides, dark and silent. That wasn't a good sign. "The thing that was chasing us," he said, "it's still out there." Soraya swallowed. "I know." Ethan glanced down at his leg, swollen, bruised, but still wrapped in the crude bandages he had made. He flexed his fingers, testing his grip. "Pain's just information," he muttered under his breath. Soraya stared at him. There it was again. That inhuman tolerance. "Ethan," she said carefully, "your injuries should have put you in shock by now." He rolled his shoulder, wincing. "Yeah, well, humans are weird." That was an understatement. Soraya had heard stories about humans, violent, unpredictable creatures with a strange hunger for war. But this one, he wasn't just strong. He was impossible. Soraya sat back, still watching him. "How do you do it?" Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Stay awake. Stay moving. Ignore pain like it's nothing." Ethan went quiet for a moment. Then he gave her a small, tired smile. "Pain doesn't mean stop," he said simply. "It just means you have to keep going." Soraya didn't know what to say to that. She had never met anything like him before. A sudden noise snapped them both into focus. A low, rumbling sound, almost like breathing. Soraya froze. Ethan's hand moved instantly to his knife. The air went still. Then, out of the thick jungle, something huge moved. Not the creature from before. Something worse. A figure stepped into the clearing. Tall, covered in black armor that shimmered under the alien sky, a helmet with glowing red eyes. Not an animal. Not a beast. A hunter. Ethan exhaled. Well, that's just great. The hunter lifted its weapon and fired. The enemies in the dark. The shot came fast. Too fast. Ethan barely had time to react. His instincts screamed at him to move, but his body was too beaten to dodge completely. The energy blast seared past his shoulder, grazing his arm. Pain flared, hot and sharp. He gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound. Soraya, however, gasped, "Ethan." But there was no time to check the wound. The hunter took a step forward, the red glow of its visor burning through the darkness. It was tall, armored, and completely silent, like a machine but moving with the precision of something alive. And it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the jungle. 5. No, 6. Their armor gleamed under the alien moonlight. Each one held a sleek, deadly weapon, their movements slow and calculated, like wolves surrounding wounded prey. Soraya's breathing turned shallow. Who? What are they? Ethan exhaled slowly. Bad news. The lead hunter tilted its head, scanning them both. Then, from its helmet, a voice crackled, cold, emotionless. Human confirmed. Execute. Ethan moved before they did. He grabbed Soraya and shoved her down just as the second shot was fired. The ground behind them exploded, sending a spray of dirt and fire into the air. Soraya yelped, covering her head. The blast could have killed them both. Ethan didn't waste time. He grabbed his knife and charged. One of the hunters lifted its rifle, but Ethan was too fast. In one fluid motion, he ducked under the barrel, grabbed the hunter's wrist, and twisted violently. A sickening snap echoed as the alien's arm bent the wrong way. The hunter let out a choked sound, but Ethan wasn't finished. Using its own weight, he slammed it into another attacker, knocking them both to the ground. Soraya's eyes widened. He was fighting them, injured, outnumbered, and still winning. But the others were already regrouping. "Soraya," Ethan barked. "Move." She snapped out of her daze and scrambled backward just as another shot narrowly missed her head. Her heart pounded. She had never been in a battle like this before. She wasn't a fighter. She was a medic. And yet, she clenched her fists, forcing herself to think. Ethan was injured. He wouldn't last long alone. She had to do something. Her eyes darted to the fallen hunter he had taken down. Its weapon lay discarded in the dirt. Soraya hesitated. Her people had always seen human weapons as barbaric, tools of destruction, designed for nothing but war. But she was out of options. She grabbed the rifle. The metal was cold in her hands, heavier than she expected. Her fingers shook as she aimed. "Breathe, Soraya. Just breathe." A hunter rushed Ethan, a blade gleaming in its hand. Soraya didn't think. She fired. The shot blasted straight through the hunter's chest. It staggered, glowing cracks splintering across its armor before it collapsed. Dead. Soraya's stomach twisted. She had never killed before. But there was no time to process it. Another hunter turned toward her, lifting its weapon. Ethan saw it first. He threw his knife. It spun through the air and buried itself in the hunter's visor. The alien dropped instantly. Ethan limped over to Soraya, gripping her arm. "You okay?" She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. Ethan's gaze flickered to the rifle in her hands. A small, almost approving smirk tugged at his lips. "Nice shot." Soraya exhaled shakily. I don't know how I." A sudden beep cut her off. The downed hunter's armor started glowing. Bright, pulsing red. Ethan's expression darkened. "Oh, hell." Soraya blinked. "What?" Boom. The bodies exploded. Ethan tackled Soraya to the ground as fire and shrapnel ripped through the air. The heat singed the back of her arms, the force sending her head spinning. When the dust finally cleared, nothing was left of the hunters except scorched earth. Ethan pushed himself up, groaning. Self-destruct protocol. Make sure no tech gets stolen. Soraya's stomach churned. They were willing to blow themselves up. Ethan sighed. I've seen worse. She believed him. He wiped blood from his forehead, scanning the jungle. We need to move. If there's one squad, there's more. Soraya hesitated. Ethan, why are they after you? He didn't answer at first. Then finally he muttered, because I'm not supposed to be alive. Soraya's breath caught. What? Ethan exhaled, his shoulders tense. Long story. Soraya narrowed her eyes. She wasn't buying it. But before she could push, a voice crackled through the wreckage of a damaged helmet nearby. A deep, commanding voice. Target still breathing. Confirm pursuit. Soraya's stomach dropped. More were coming. Ethan pulled his knife from the corpse, wiping it on his torn sleeve. Then let's not keep them waiting. The last stand. The jungle was no longer silent. Heavy footsteps echoed through the trees. Low, distorted voices muttered in an unknown language, their words crackling through high-tech communicators. Red lights flickered in the shadows. The hunters were coming. Ethan's grip on his knife tightened. His body was battered. His shoulder burned from the graze of an energy blast, and his leg, already broken, was screaming at him to stop moving. But he wouldn't. Couldn't. He exhaled slowly, scanning the dense vegetation around them. They had maybe a minute before the next squad arrived. Soraya knelt beside him, her breaths shallow. She was still gripping the rifle she had taken, but her hands were shaking. Ethan nudged her. You okay? She blinked at him, her purple eyes wide. I killed someone. Ethan studied her for a moment. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained for this. She had never fought before tonight. And yet, she had saved him. Yeah, he said quietly. You did. She swallowed hard. I didn't even think. I just acted. That's how you survive. Her gaze flickered down to his leg. But how are you surviving? Ethan smirked, trying to lighten the moment. I'm too stubborn to die. She shook her head. No, it's more than that. Your pain tolerance. It's not normal. Ethan didn't answer, because she was right. But before she could push further, a sharp beeping came from the fallen hunter's helmet nearby. Ethan cursed. They locked onto our position. Soraya stiffened. We have to run. No point. She whipped toward him. What do you mean, no point? Ethan stood slowly, wincing. They're faster, better armed. And I'm not exactly in marathon condition here. He turned, pointing toward a rocky outcrop just beyond the trees. But if we hold our ground there, we might make it. Soraya stared at him like he was insane. You want to fight? He flashed a bloody grin. Not the first time I've been outnumbered. Soraya's heart pounded. The idea of standing and fighting against an elite hunting squad was insane. But she looked at Ethan. Despite everything, the injuries, the exhaustion, the fact that he should be unconscious or dead, he was still standing, still willing to fight. Soraya had always been taught that humans were dangerous, reckless, war-driven creatures. But looking at him now, she realized they weren't just warriors. They were survivors. She tightened her grip on the rifle and nodded. Okay. Ethan grinned. That's the spirit. Together, they ran for the outcrop. The battle begins. The first energy bolt nearly took Ethan's head off. It sizzled past his ear, slamming into a tree and exploding in a burst of fire. Go, go, Ethan barked, shoving Soraya ahead. They reached the rocks just as the hunters emerged from the jungle. 8 this time, fully armored, fully armed. One of them pointed. Target identified. Engage. And then, all hell broke loose. Ethan versus the impossible odds. Ethan moved first. Despite his injuries, despite the odds, he launched himself into the fight with the sheer rage of a man who refused to die. He was fast. Too fast. The nearest hunter raised his weapon. But Ethan was already there. He grabbed the barrel and yanked it downward just as the shot fired. The blast missed him, carving a deep crater into the rock instead. Then he struck. A brutal elbow to the hunter's visor. A knife through the armor seam. The alien choked as the blade tore through its throat. Dead. Ethan ripped the weapon from its hands and turned just as another one charged. Saraya fired a shot, but missed. The hunter lunged. Ethan caught the attack, twisting midair and slamming the enemy into the ground. He wrenched the hunter's own gun from its grip. Bang! A single shot to the head. The body slumped, lifeless. But Ethan barely had time to breathe before another tackled him. They crashed against the rock, wrestling for control. Ethan's knife clattered to the ground. The hunter's visor glowed red, its alien strength crushing down on him. For the first time, Ethan felt the weight of exhaustion. Then, Saraya moved. She raised the rifle, her hand steadier than before, and fired. The hunter's chest burst open, spraying glowing blue blood as it collapsed. Ethan shoved the body off him and shot Saraya a grin. Told you you had it in you. She didn't smile back. There's still more. 5 left. The final stand. One hunter raised a heavy cannon, aiming directly at them. Ethan grabbed Saraya and pulled her down just as the cannon fired. The ground erupted. The force sent them rolling down the rocky slope, pain exploding through Ethan's side. Saraya landed hard, her head spinning. When she looked up, she saw. Ethan wasn't moving. Her stomach dropped. Ethan. He didn't respond. The hunter stepped closer, raising its weapon. Saraya's heart pounded. She was alone. No, not alone. Ethan had fought for her, had saved her. Now it was her turn. She grabbed the fallen rifle and aimed. Her hands were steady. She fired. The end of the battle. The last hunter fell, its armor cracking apart from the blast. Saraya let out a shuddering breath, her entire body trembling. Silence. It was over. She turned to Ethan, crawling to his side. Ethan, wake up. For a horrible, suffocating moment, he didn't move. Then, a low groan. He blinked up at her, his face bruised, bloody, but somehow still smirking. Hell of a fight, he muttered. Saraya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. You insane, stubborn human. You almost died. Ethan coughed. Yeah, but I didn't. Saraya shook her head, exasperated. How do you keep doing this? Ethan's smile faded slightly. He looked at the sky, at the smoking battlefield around them, then back at her. Because that's what humans do, he said. We survive. Saraya stared at him, something changing inside her. She had been taught to fear humans. But for the first time, she understood. Humans weren't just warriors. They were something else entirely. The truth about humans. The battlefield was quiet. Smoke curled into the alien sky, mixing with the scent of blood, burnt armor, and the metallic tang of energy weapons. The jungle, once alive with the sounds of distant creatures, had fallen into an eerie silence. Saraya sat beside Ethan, her hands still trembling from the fight. The rifle she had used to kill was still in her lap, the barrel cooling. She could still hear the shots in her head. She had never taken a life before tonight. She looked at Ethan, bruised, bloody, but somehow alive. He exhaled, shifting slightly. You okay? Saraya stared at him, incredulous. You're the one who was just beaten, shot, and nearly crushed, and you're asking if I'm okay. Ethan smirked, but his usual cocky expression faltered. He was exhausted. She could see it in his eyes. Yet he was still here, still fighting. Saraya clenched her fists. How? Ethan blinked, How what? How do you keep surviving? Ethan chuckled, then winced, pressing a hand to his ribs. I ask myself the same thing sometimes. Soraya wasn't joking. No, really. This isn't normal. You should be. She stopped herself. You should be dead. Ethan sighed. It's just what we do. Soraya shook her head. No, my people, the Venari. We have superior medical technology. But even with that, we feel pain intensely. Our bodies shut down to protect us from too much damage. But you, she gestured to him. You should be unconscious right now. Maybe even dying. Yet here you are, talking like this is just another day. Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if considering his words. Humans are built different. Soraya scoffed. That's an understatement. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his face. All right, you want to know the truth. Soraya nodded. Ethan looked at the stars, as if debating whether to even tell her. Then, finally, he spoke. We weren't the strongest, he said quietly. Not at first. Soraya frowned. What do you mean? Ethan shifted, sitting up despite the pain. There were creatures on our planet that were bigger, stronger, faster. We weren't the smartest either, not always. But we were something else. We endured. Soraya listened, fascinated. We ran for miles for days, without stopping, because we had to. We fought things we had no business fighting. Starved, struggled, died. And then we got up and did it again. And again. His gaze flickered to her. You want to know why I can still move? Why I'm still alive? Soraya swallowed. She did. Ethan smirked. Because humans don't break easy. Soraya shivered. It wasn't arrogance. It was a fact. The way he said it, casually, truthfully, like it was just something written into his DNA. She suddenly realized why her people had feared humans for so long. It wasn't just their aggression. It was their persistence. No matter how hard you hit them, they got back up. Soraya exhaled, shaking her head. That's terrifying. Ethan grinned. Yeah, a lot of people think that. She looked away, staring at the ruined battlefield. The bodies of the fallen hunters were still smoking. Some of their armor had already self-destructed. But the ones that hadn't, she saw something blinking. Soraya's breath hitched. Ethan. He turned, and then he saw it. A small red light flashing on one of the corpses. A beacon. Soraya's heart plummeted. They called for backup. Ethan cursed under his breath. More are coming. Soraya quickly checked her wrist device. Still no signal. We need to get off this planet, she said, voice urgent. If they're bringing more forces. They will, Ethan muttered. Soraya bit her lip. We don't stand a chance. Ethan glanced at the dead hunters, at their gear. Then something clicked in his mind. Maybe we do. Soraya blinked. What? Ethan limped toward one of the fallen soldiers, crouching down and prying open the damaged helmet. Inside was a communication relay. He pulled it free. Soraya's eyes widened. Wait, you're not seriously thinking. Oh, I'm seriously thinking, Ethan said, already rewiring the controls. Soraya crouched beside him. Do you even know how that works? Ethan smirked. Nope, but I learned fast. Soraya groaned. This is insane. Ethan shrugged. Wouldn't be my first bad idea. Despite herself, Soraya smiled slightly. Ethan worked fast. His hands were steady, his mind sharp despite the fact that his body had taken enough damage to kill anyone else. Soraya stared. What kind of creature was he? Then, the communicator crackled. Ethan's eyes lit up. Got something. Soraya leaned in. What kind of something? Ethan fiddled with the device. Static. Then, a voice. Unit 9 reporting. Backup inbound. ETA, 10 minutes. Soraya's stomach tightened. They're coming, she whispered. Ethan didn't panic. Instead, he grinned. Perfect. Soraya gawked at him. How is that perfect? Ethan glanced at her. Because they don't know we hijacked the signal. Soraya blinked. Then, realization dawned. Ethan smirked. They think they're coming in for cleanup, but they're walking into a trap. Soraya hesitated. That's risky. Ethan shrugged. Yeah, but it's also our only shot. Soraya exhaled. Insane. Completely insane. But, looking at him, at the fire in his eyes, at the refusal to give up despite everything, she realized something. She believed him. She believed they could win. Soraya stood, gripping her rifle. All right, human. She smirked. Let's set a trap. Ethan grinned. Now you're getting it. The jungle rumbled. The sky darkened. And war was coming. Humanity's greatest strength. The jungle was no longer just a battleground. It was a trap. Soraya crouched beside Ethan behind the fallen wreckage of an old ship, her fingers tightening around the stolen rifle. Their plan was madness. And yet, it was their only chance. Ethan had hacked the enemy signal, feeding them false data. The reinforcements thought they were arriving for a routine cleanup mission, a few stragglers, an easy kill. Instead, they were walking straight into an ambush, a human-made ambush. Soraya's pulse pounded as she checked the modified explosives Ethan had rigged from scavenged parts. This is risky. Ethan smirked, leaning against the rock. Life's boring without a little risk. Soraya rolled her eyes but didn't argue. He was terrifyingly good at this. Even injured, Ethan moved with purpose. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. Humans weren't just survivors. They were predators. And tonight, the hunters were about to become the hunted. The arrival of death. The enemy ships came fast and silent, dropping into the clearing like falling knives. 3. Each one was sleek, black, built for war. Soraya's breath caught as the ramps hissed open, and the first wave of soldiers marched out. More than before. Heavily armored. Elite. Ethan muttered under his breath. Great. They sent the big boys. Soraya swallowed. Can we still do this? Ethan grinned. Oh, we were born for this. The soldiers spread out, scanning the seemingly empty battlefield. One of them spoke through the comms. Targets unaccounted for. Scanning perimeter. Ethan held up 3 fingers. 3 seconds. Soraya tensed. 2 fingers. The lead soldier stepped forward, reaching for his scanner. 1. Ethan smirked. Boom. The jungle explodes. The first explosion ripped through the clearing, sending debris and bodies flying. Soraya's ears rang from the impact as fire erupted, swallowing the front line of soldiers in an instant. Before the second wave could react, Ethan was already moving. He sprinted forward, despite his injuries, despite the pain. A human at war. He grabbed a fallen weapon and fired 3 shots. 1 to the chest, 1 to the visor, 1 to the throat. 3 enemies down before they could even lift their guns. Soraya hesitated only a moment before she followed, her rifle spitting blue energy. Her first shot missed. The second didn't. An enemy collapsed, armor sparking. She didn't stop. Ethan had shown her how to fight. Now, she was fighting for him. The enemy recovered fast. They weren't weak. They adapted. But Ethan, he was faster. One of the soldiers lunged, swinging a plasma blade. Ethan ducked under the strike, caught the soldier's wrist, and broke it with one brutal twist. The soldier barely had time to scream before Ethan drove his own knife into the gap in his armor. The body dropped. Soraya panted, pressing herself against cover. This is working. Ethan grinned. Told ya. Then, a shadow moved above them. Soraya's eyes widened. Ethan. A sniper had taken position on the wreckage above. Ethan looked up, just as the shot fired. The fall of the human. The blast slammed into Ethan's side. For the first time, he staggered. Soraya felt her heart stop. Ethan dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his armor. Soraya screamed. She turned, instinct taking over. Her rifle snapped up. The sniper didn't have time to fire again. Soraya pulled the trigger. The energy blast tore through the air, straight into the sniper's head. The body collapsed. Soraya dropped her weapon, rushing to Ethan. "Stay with me, Ethan." Ethan groaned, his face twisted in pain. That sucked. Soraya pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You're losing too much blood." Ethan grinned weakly. "I've lost worse." Soraya's hands shook. She had never been more afraid. Not for herself. For him. "Why?" she whispered. Ethan blinked. "Huh. Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep getting back up?" Ethan smiled. "Even in pain. Even dying. Because," he whispered, "humans don't stop." The final choice. The last few enemy soldiers were falling back, retreating to their ships. The battle was won. But Soraya didn't care. She only cared about Ethan. She clenched her fists. She refused to lose him. Her people had advanced medicine, but no human had ever been treated by Venari technology before. It could work, or it could kill them. She looked down at Ethan, at his half-lidded eyes, his breath slowing. She made her decision. She grabbed her wrist device, overriding the medical protocols. The nanotech hissed as it injected directly into Ethan's wound. Ethan jerked. Soraya held her breath. "Please, please let it work." For a long, horrible moment, nothing happened. Then, Ethan gasped. His body arched, his wounds closing faster than should be possible. His pulse stabilized. Soraya let out a shaking breath. It worked. Ethan groaned. That was weird. Soraya laughed. It was the first real laugh she had since this started. "You insane, stubborn human," she whispered. "You really can survive anything." Ethan smirked. "Told you." Soraya shook her head, helping him up. The battle was over. They had won. And Soraya. She finally understood what made humans truly terrifying. It wasn't their strength. It wasn't their weapons. It was their refusal to die. Ethan grinned at her. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." And together, they walked away from the battlefield. Humans didn't break. Humans didn't surrender. Humans survived.